By way of preparation for our summer school, Monet and the landscape, I'm going to look at a transcription of one of Monet's paintings, and I'm going to demonstrate some of the steps that he took in his painting process and the steps that we're going to follow when we're painting outdoors. And I can talk you through some of the materials and illustrate the approach that we're going to take. We're going to begin by working on small A5 postcard size canvas boards like this. And the first thing to do, the surface is white and has been primed, but I've got a little bit of burnt umber for you, with which you can cover the surface with a bit of spirit, just so that we're working on a not white surface, and also a slightly wet fluid surface, which will help with applying paint and moving paint around. So I'll give you a list of the colours that we're going to work with, and also I'm going to carry out this demonstration using a number 1 long square flat and a number 4, a little bit unsure. Anyway, the point being, we're working on a postcard size surface, and I'm going to work mainly with the number 4 brush, so using something relatively large for the size of the painted surface, so that I can simplify and will struggle to get into too much detail. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got some of my burnt umber, which I've diluted a bit with some of the medium, which is in the dipper. The medium is linseed oil mixed with terps, and I've got also got some spirit that I have been using to clean my brush, and I've used to dilute my burnt umber. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing first. I can refer to the painting that I'm transcribing, and I'm just going to draw out some of the lines, and if I have a slightly less dilute umber, I can draw some of the shapes. It's a fairly simple subject here that I've taken on, but I think I'll be able to give you a good introduction to how these paintings might develop just by showing you this simple introduction. So this is really the drawing stage. If we were out in the landscape, I'd be encouraging you to look with your eyes half closed to see where some of the darker shapes are, and getting you really to outline your subject. So we've got trees, bushes, we've got some distant hills, and then the river with some of its reflections. So that's really a tonal start. I'm aware that you may be not seeing this so well because of the reflection, so let me adjust that. So now I'm going to pre-mix some of the main colours for this little study. I'll begin with the sky, because what I want to do is really work with some of the larger areas first. So the sky, a main colour for the trees and bushes. And actually in this particular painting, Monet's sky is mainly a kind of yellow, a muted yellow, pale yellow. So with my palette knife, I've taken some of the titanium white, a little bit of the ochre, and a touch of the ivory black, just to knock it back. So there is a substantial mixture. I'm going to dip my knife into the dipper and take a drop of the medium and mix that through as well. because from now on I'm going to be using the white spirit in my can just to clean my brush. And when I've cleaned my brush, I'm going to dry it on a rag so that now the job of my brush is to pick up a significant amount of this mixture on the tip of the brush and spread it out on the painting. And I'm using the number 4 brush to do that. And I've got my outlines as a bit of a guide for applying that paint. And you see actually I'm holding my brush almost parallel to the surface of the painting. And that means that I can control how much the paint mixes, how much it mixes with that prepared background. I put a bit of umber on to get rid of the white. And if I paint back and forth, I'll mix the paint on the surface of the painting. If I pick up the paint on the tip of the brush and hold it parallel and paint fairly directly, one stroke, then that paint won't mix, or the degree of mixing will be less. So that's not so significant at the moment because I've only got the tinted background, but as I begin to apply more colours to this wet surface, then I'll want to be able to control that mixing. And I do it partly by having enough paint prepared so I can pick it up on the tip of the brush, and partly by how much I work the paint on the surface of the painting. So I've made a new mixture now for painting the trees and the bushes. I've taken some cerulean blue and some yellow ochre, and I've mixed them together. Again, a drop of the medium. And I've made a fairly substantial amount because, having blocked in, again using my number 4 brush, I've cleaned it and I'll dry it on a rag. Once I've blocked in these areas of trees and bushes with this first colour, or with this first application, a little bit later I'm going to come back to these areas and I'm going to first modify the colour that's on the palette by making some of it darker and making a lighter version as well. And then I'm going to develop the contrast in these trees and bushes. But there's reflections as well, so I'll get some of that colour into the water. So my point is that I've made enough of this particular green so that there's some left over for me to adjust. I can make it darker, lighter, and so on. So I'm just filling in a main colour for the area of the water. Monet in his version has used lots of different colours because there are reflections from the sky and the trees. But what I need to do at this stage is simplify that. So when we're out in the landscape and you see lots of different colours, the task at this stage is to simplify and try to identify a main colour which will represent a whole area like the water, and then on top of that, as the painting develops, more specific local varied colours will be added. So now that I'm blocking in the area of the hills in the distance, again with one main colour, now that I've done that, that's everything more or less blocked in. So most of the painting surface is covered, but I've gone for big areas and tried to identify a main colour, a main mix for those. I'm now going to start to add some lighter and darker variations, and I'll work on the trees in the middle. So I've been mixing colours for the trees. This was my original mixture that I blocked in first with the ochre and the cerulean blue. And from that, by adding more black and more cerulean blue, I've made a darker version of the tree colour, and the other side by adding some white and some more ochre and a little bit of lemon yellow. I made a lighter version. So this is like a family of colours. They're all related, and they have now been modified, or the original base colour has now been modified to lighter and darker versions. There's plenty of paint there because now I want to do some different things. I'm going to use the number 1 brush. I think I'll start with the dark, and I'm looking at the transcription, looking at the reproduction of Monet's painting with my eyes half closed to see where some of the dark shapes are in those trees. Now you might notice as I continue to work with this same dark colour, it becomes less dark. I'm mixing what is on the brush, the dark colour, with the wet paint on the surface. And that's something that I can control. If I want the paint to remain dark, I need to pick up a fresh piece of paint on a clean brush, and as I've described, almost float it on the surface, not work it too much. That has now mixed with what's on the surface, so what's on the tip of my brush now isn't quite as dark, so that might do for other places. There might be other places where I want to have a slight variation in that green, making it a little bit darker. So even though the paint on the tip of the brush is no longer clean, there may be other places in the painting where it can be put to work. But if I'm quite clear that I need something much darker, I have to clean my brush and wipe it dry so that I can pick up something fresh, clean. So I'm going to try now some of the lighter stuff. And the lighter stuff I really do want, the lighter mixture I really want to stand out. So I'm going to again hold my brush parallel to the painting and really sit that on the surface, float it so that it stands out. And again, the paint on the tip of the brush is no longer clean. I might be able to keep some of that though, put it back on the palette, but just wipe my brush on the rag. I don't always have to clean it in the spirit, just wiping it on the rag will give me enough, clean it enough. And again, I think I see now that there are other areas where I don't have to make that mark quite as light. And I can put the slightly muddied paint to work in other places. So it's very much about being aware of what's on the tip of your brush. Is it clean paint? Has it been mixed? And what exactly do you want to achieve with applying that paint to a particular part of the painting? Next, I've made some mixtures for the sky. I'm going back to the number 4 brush, and this time, rather than making the colours stand out, rather than floating these pale blues that I'm putting into the sky, I'm actually working them a fair amount, letting the paint mix on the surface. Now for this demonstration I've done quite a lot of pre-mixing because I think that's a very good discipline for people to learn and to practice. Monet, of course, more and more, especially in the later years, was mixing paint all the time on the canvas, doing less and less pre-mixing and putting the paint on from the tubes. But here I think we've an opportunity to develop a good discipline of pre-mixing, because when you pre-mix, you really have to decide what is the colour, what colour is needed. But as I say here with this sky, because I want to have quite subtle variations from the yellowish cream to the blues, I'm letting the brush mix on the canvas to get those subtle gradations. So lastly, I'm just going to do one or two very specific colours which will stand out, and it's right to be doing that towards the end of the painting. So I've been working from general areas of colour to much more specific, sort of local and sometimes quite brighter colours. And that's probably one of the big challenges of being confronted with the landscape, the real landscape, is deciding how to simplify colours, what to leave out, and as I've been trying to do, find a kind of order whereby you start with big areas, main areas of colour, and then work towards much more specific things. And in Monet's painting there are, I'm not sure exactly what these are, but there are these bright, almost bright yellow bushes in the middle ground, colours that stand out. And there's also quite a lot of warmth in the water. So I've tried to cover a few basic points so that when you come to our different landscape locations, you'll be familiar with some of the materials and some of the first approaches. I will start you off with maybe a couple of these postcard size studies, and we'll go from handling paint on this scale, which will allow you to use a lot more paint. It'll allow you to deal with the issues of how much you mix the paint on the surface, how much you float colours, and of course the whole business of pre-mixing those colours. And I'll have some suggestions of mixtures that might be quite useful to you, the sorts of things that we've looked at in this particular demonstration. And then we'll move on from these postcard size studies to larger scale paintings. Okay, so let's hope the sun shines. Bye bye now.